Are reportedly preparing for talks in Turkey this week in hopes of easing tensions between the two nations. This as the Ayatollah warns the U.S. not to attack Iran, posting on X, quote, "The Americans should know if they start a war, this time it will be a regional war." But President Trump isn't backing down, saying this when asked by a reporter.
On Iran, the Supreme Leader today said that U.S. attack could spark a regional war. Giving you response to that?
Why wouldn't he say that? Of course you're going to say that. But we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, a couple of days, and hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are jumping straight into the deep end today.
We really are.
I mean, we're looking at this geopolitical staring contest that is, unfolding in pretty much real time. We're analyzing the specific diplomatic and military signaling between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And I think we should be clear right off the bat, this isn't just about, trading insults.
No, not at all.
We're really trying to understand what some analysts are calling Trump's Middle East calculus.
It is a calculus. That's honestly the perfect word for it, because you're dealing with a kind of formula where the variables are just extremely volatile.
How so?
Well, you have these high-stakes threats of a, quote, regional war sitting right next to an explicitly stated hope for a diplomatic deal.
It's a paradox.
It's a total paradox. You're seeing the language of, total escalation and the language of negotiation happening almost in the same breath.
And that's what jumped out at me right away. Usually you get one or the other, right? You're either in a detente phase or you're on a war footing.
Exactly.
But here the signals feel mixed, or at least they can seem that way. I think our mission today is really to decode that, to understand how deterrence and diplomacy can actually function together here instead of, canceling each other out.
And to do that, you have to move past the headlines that just scream crisis. You got to look at the specific mechanics of this exchange, because when you strip away all that noise, you see a very deliberate strategy. It's pressure, it's deterrence, and it's this kind of conditional openness to talks.
It's a high-wire act.
A very high-wire act.
Okay, so let's start with the catalyst. This whole cycle kicked off with a warning from Iran's supreme leader. And this wasn't just vague posturing, was it?
No, he was incredibly specific. Khamenei laid out a very clear trigger event. He stated that any U.S. military attack on Iran would, and this is the key phrase, trigger a broader regional war.
I want to drill down on that phrase, regional war, because in, casual conversation, that just sounds like things get messy.
Right.
But in a strategic context, when a leader like Khamenei says that, what is he actually threatening?
He's threatening the removal of boundaries. That is the critical distinction. If he had said, we will defend ourselves, that's a conventional bilateral threat.
Okay.
But regional war, that implies activating a whole network. He's signaling the conflict won't be contained to Iranian soil or, just U.S. assets. It's a signal that the borders of the conflict will dissolve.
Pulling in neighboring countries, shipping lanes, all of it.
All of it. The whole energy infrastructure.
So it's a threat of expansion. He's telling the U.S., you think you can conduct some kind of surgical strike. Think again. The entire chessboard gets knocked over.
Precisely. It's a classic deterrent strategy. It's called deterrence by punishment. He's not saying they can stop a U.S. attack, which would be deterrence by denial. He's saying the cost of that attack, the chaos that follows, will be so astronomically high that the U.S. just won't want to pay it.
It shifts the calculation.
It totally shifts the calculation from can we hit this target to can we possibly afford the fallout.
Wow. I mean, that is a heavy threat. It puts the stability of the entire global economy, regional alliances, everything on the line. So faced with that kind of ultimatum, touch us and the region burns, you'd expect a U.S. leader to respond with, immediate fire and fury.
Or panic.
Right, or panic. But Trump's response was, well, it was different.
It was notably different. We didn't see that immediate escalation. Instead, we saw a kind of tactical dismissal. Trump's response was to downplay the warning.
And he used that very specific phrase, which I think we need to unpack. He called Khamenei's warning expected rhetoric.
And that phrase is doing a massive amount of strategic work. Expected rhetoric.
It sounds almost bored.
It's designed to sound that way. I mean, think about the psychology of it. If a leader comes out and says, this threat is a crisis, we are on high alert, what are you doing? You're validating the adversary's power. You're saying, your words have shaken us.
Right.
But by calling it expected rhetoric, Trump is doing two things. First, he's saying, we are not surprised. Surprise implies a vulnerability, an intelligence failure. He's signaling this was already factored into the game plan.
So it completely neutralizes the shock value.
Completely. And second, it reframes the threat itself. It strips that regional war warning of its operational weight and just categorizes it as words.
It's a status move.
It's a total status move. It frames their most terrifying threat as just standard operating procedure. He says, we know your script, and frankly, we're not impressed.
That is a fascinating form of de-escalation, isn't it? Usually we think of de-escalation as like backing down or offering something.
Olive branch.
Yeah, but this is de-escalation through dismissal. It refuses to let the other side set the tempo of the crisis.
That's it. It keeps the U.S. in control of the narrative. But, and there is a risk here,
Go on.
if you only dismiss the threat, you risk looking complacent, or like you don't actually understand the danger. And that can create a miscalculation trap where the other side thinks, oh, they don't believe us. Well, let's show them.
Which brings us to the second part of this whole equation, because he didn't just wave it off. While calling the words rhetoric, he pivoted immediately to the physical reality.
Yes. The dismissal of the words was paired with an assertion of capability. Trump stressed that the United States is militarily prepared.
This is the big stick part of the equation.
It's the necessary counterbalance. You can't effectively downplay a threat unless you also show that you can handle the consequences if you're wrong.
So that's the core of military deterrence.
Absolutely. He is distinguishing between the intent of the adversary, which he's calling rhetoric, and the capacity of the U.S., which he's calling prepared.
Let's unpack militarily prepared for a minute. What does that signal in this specific context? It's not just about having a big budget.
No. The signal is readiness for that specific regional war scenario he was just threatened with. It's a communication to Tehran that says, we heard your threat about expanding the conflict. We aren't worried about your words, but if you act on them, we have the assets in place to finish it.
So it validates American power without validating the fear of Iranian power. It creates this kind of prepared composure.
Prepared composure. I like that. I'm not scared, but I am locked and loaded.
Right. But if we stop the story here, we just have a classic standoff. Side A threatens chaos. Side B says, try me. We've seen that movie 100 times.
We have. And usually that just leads to a frozen conflict or, a slow climb up the escalation ladder. But this is where the calculus gets really complex. This is where the third variable comes in.
The diplomatic deal.
Exactly. Amidst all this talk of regional war and military preparedness, Trump explicitly says he hopes for a diplomatic deal with Iran.
This is the part that I think gives a lot of people whiplash. How do you go from, we are ready to destroy you, to let's make a deal in the same 24-hour news cycle? It feels so contradictory.
It feels contradictory, but in coercive diplomacy, it's actually complementary. In fact, you often can't have one without the other. I mean, think about it. Why would Iran want to make a deal if there wasn't a credible threat hanging over them?
And on the other side, why would the U.S. threaten force if there wasn't some kind of desired political outcome?
That is the textbook definition of this strategy.
Yeah.
Pressure, deterrence, and openness to talks. If you just have pressure, you get war. If you just have openness, you can get taken advantage of.
So the military preparedness creates the pressure, and the offer of a deal provides the release valve.
That's it. The strategy is to squeeze the adversary with the reality of military power and the dismissal of their counter threats, leaving them with really only one attractive option.
Which is the deal.
The deal becomes the off-ramp. He's signaling this openness to talks, not because he's backing down, but because he wants to channel all this tension into a negotiation.
So it's a message to the regime in Tehran. We don't want to use our military. We'd prefer a diplomatic solution. The door is open. But, and this feels like a critical, but it's not an open-ended invitation, is it?
Not at all. There's a very sharp caveat attached. Trump made it crystal clear that if negotiations fail, the situation could escalate.
That changes the tone of the hope quite a bit. It turns it from an olive branch into more of an ultimatum.
It basically weaponizes the negotiation itself. It frames diplomacy not just as a preference, but as the only thing holding back the floodgates.
It's a binary choice then, deal or escalation.
It is. And notice how it circles right back to Khamenei's initial warning. Khamenei said, attack us and you get a regional war. Trump's counter-calculus is, we're prepared for that war, but if you want to avoid it, you must negotiate.
So he's trying to reverse the leverage.
Exactly. Instead of the U.S. being deterred by the fear of regional war, the U.S. is using the threat of its own escalation to force a diplomatic outcome. It's really fascinating how the source material highlights that specific sequence.
It implies the negotiations are the goal, but the threat is the engine driving everyone to the table.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. It's about achieving what's called escalation dominance. The idea is that you show the adversary that no matter how high they climb, threatening a regional war, activating proxies, you can climb one rung higher.
And once they realize they can't win that escalation game,
The negotiation table starts to look like the only safe place to be.
but that's a dangerous game to play, isn't it? I mean, for this whole calculus to work, the other side has to agree with your math. What if Khamenei looks at this and just says, I don't believe you?
And that is the inherent risk. It relies on perception. If Iran believes the expected rhetoric comment means the U.S. is actually distracted, they might miscalculate and push too far.
Or if they believe the military preparedness is just a bluff, they might decide to test it.
Right. And on the flip side, if the U.S. pushes the pressure part too hard, they might accidentally trigger the very regional war they're trying to deter. It's an incredibly delicate balance.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for everyone listening. We've got three main pillars here: pressure, deterrence, and diplomacy.
That's right. The pressure comes from, refusing to be rattled by threats. The deterrence is the explicit military preparedness. That's the big stick. And the diplomacy is the conditional offer of a deal, the carrot.
And the glue holding it all together is this very specific communication style, that expected rhetoric comment. It strikes me how much of modern conflict is just psychological.
It is. We are watching a negotiation happen in public through the media.
Yeah.
When Trump says expected rhetoric, he's talking to the American public, telling them to stay calm. He's talking to allies, telling them we are steady. And he's talking to Tehran, telling them their threats are being discounted.
It's a multi-layered signal. And when he says hopes for a deal, he's trying to corner them into a diplomatic room. It really does make you read the news differently, It's easy to see these headlines and think it's just random outbursts.
He said this, then he said that.
Yeah.
But there is a structure here.
There's absolutely a structure. And for you listening, that's the key takeaway. When you see a hope for peace paired with a preparation for war, don't see it as confusion. See it as a system. The hope is the goal. The preparation is the leverage.
One doesn't work without the other.
They can't.
It also highlights just how fragile this moment is. This entire calculus rests on the assumption that if negotiations fail, there is an alternative. And that alternative is escalation.
And that brings us right back to Khamenei's warning, regional war. That's the ghost hanging over the if negotiations fail clause. Both sides have now explicitly defined the worst case scenario.
So we're in this period of, conditional patience? I think so. The U.S. is waiting to see if the pressure yields a deal, while Iran is waiting to see if their threats yield U.S. caution. And the clock is ticking.
Because you can't maintain a strategy like this forever.
No. You can't stay at heightened military preparedness indefinitely. And you can't keep dismissing threats as rhetoric if the other side starts taking small actions to prove they're serious. Eventually, the rhetoric has to match reality, one way or another.
And that's really the so what for everyone listening. This isn't just about a deal or no deal. It's about whether this specific combination of pressure and openness can actually work in a region that is so primed to explode.
It's the ultimate test of the calculus. Can you solve the equation before the variables combust?
We've covered the warning, the dismissal, the preparedness, and the ultimatum. It's a fascinating but also terrifying puzzle.
It really is. And it's a good reminder that in international relations, sometimes the most contradictory statements are the most revealing ones.
As we wrap this up, I want to leave everyone with that final provocative thought you mentioned earlier. We talked about the balance tipping.
Yes. I want you to just think about this. We know the strategy is basically talks or escalation. But at what precise point does that balance tip? If both sides are threatening escalation and both sides are actively preparing for it, how long is the window for diplomacy actually open? When does the calculus stop being about the math of negotiation and start being about the physics of war?
A sobering thought to end on.
It is, and that's the question that will determine what happens next.
Well, thank you for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one. Stay informed.